Route 2A in Maine has always had a dangerous reputation among drivers. Many accidents, narrow stretches, unstable weather. But what most people don't know, or pretend not to know, is that there is a specific stretch of road, near Haynesville, where things happen that cannot be explained. I used to laugh at these cursed road stories until I saw it with my own eyes. It was last winter, around 3 a.m. The temperature was near freezing, the road dark and empty. Visibility was not the best, because of the low mist rising from the frozen asphalt. I was alone, heading east, when I saw a man on the side of the road. He was standing with his thumb outstretched like he was hitchhiking. He wore a worn denim jacket, dark pants, and a flat-brimmed cap. I thought it was another truck driver who had problems with his truck. I slowed down, turned on my hazard lights and pulled over. But the moment I got closer, he was gone. He didn't run, he didn't throw himself into the bushes, he didn't turn the other way. It just disappeared. As if I had never been there. I stood there for a few seconds, looking around. I got out of the cabin. Nothing. I looked at the ground, trying to find marks, footprints in the snow. And there were indeed, footprints leading to the spot where he was, and then, nothing. As if he had evaporated from there. I went back to the truck with goosebumps all over my body. I turned the engine back on, but I couldn't take my eyes off the rearview mirror for a long time. And when I looked at the passenger seat, I reflexively got a fright. The seatbelt was stretched, as if someone was sitting there. I hit the seat with my hand and the belt went back to normal. But the feeling that there was someone in there with me didn't go away anytime soon. I continued my journey on autopilot, trying to think of any logical explanation. But a few kilometers later, the radio turned on by itself. It was off. And there was no station tuned in, just static. But behind the static, for a few seconds, I heard breathing. Slow, loud. As if someone was using the microphone on the wrong side. I turned it off immediately. And then, like a punch in the stomach, the memory came to me, the truck driver, he had no face. When I first saw him, on the side of the road, I had thought it was the distorting light from the headlights, but now I remembered it clearly. Where there should have been a face, there was just smooth skin. No features. After that memory hit me, the panic really set in. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the light was bad, that I was just tired. But that wouldn't leave his head. A faceless man, waving calmly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. As if he was used to repeating this night after night. I started to accelerate, wanting to get out of that section as quickly as possible. But it seemed like the road stretched on. The GPS froze, showing the same curve I had already passed minutes before. And the dashboard clock stopped at 3:17. No matter how much I drove, nothing changed. Then he appeared again. At the same spot on the road. Same jacket, same cap. Same wave. But now, I knew. I didn't pull over. I just kept going, my eyes fixed on him as he slowly passed. And when the headlights illuminated him fully, I saw more clearly, he really didn't have a face. Just stretched skin where his eyes, his mouth, everything should be. And yet, he kept turning his head toward me. Like he was watching me. Like he knew I was seeing him properly for the first time. Then he raised his arm, and waved again. I continued on my journey without stopping for over an hour. I only started to breathe easier when I saw the first signs of civilization. When I stopped at a gas station and quickly told the attendant what had happened, he just said, "You saw the truck driver, right?" Without laughing. Without surprise. As if it were something common. He said he had heard at least 10 drivers talk about the faceless one. always on the same stretch of road. Always waving. Always disappearing. Some say he died there, trying to call for help. Others think he's not even human, the guy said. But no one can pull over. He never gets in. Since then, every time I cross Maine, I avoid this stretch. I turn around, take the dirt road, but I don't go that way anymore. And every time someone new on the route talks about seeing someone hitchhiking at night, everyone already knows what it is. Some try to stop. Most people don't even look. But everyone feels the same thing, a presence inside the cabin, even with the door locked. A breath on the radio, even when it's off. And one question that won't go away: what if one day he agrees to join? I was obsessed for a while. I started looking for stories online, among truck drivers, on road forums. I found more people. Stories spread over the years, all talking about a man asking for a ride, always on foggy nights, always on the same stretch of road. Some saw only a shadow. Others remembered the face only later, or rather, its absence. One guy said he stopped and got out with a flashlight, but only found footprints. He said that when he got back into the truck, the windows were all fogged up inside. As if someone had been breathing in there the whole time. Ever since then, when I drive alone, especially at night, I carry a small mirror hanging from my dashboard. An old man on the road told me that spirits who have lost their faces show themselves in their reflection. I don't know if that's true. But there's something comforting about being able to see my own face there. It confirms that it's still me. That no one has come in uninvited. And sometimes, when I pass near that area, I cover the mirror. I don't want to know what might appear there. The strangest thing is that, in the weeks following the encounter, I had recurring dreams. Always the same scene: I'm stopped on the side of the road, and someone knocks on the passenger window. When I look, it's him. No face. Just standing there, as if he's waiting for me to open it. He never says anything. He just stands there. And I always wake up at exactly the same moment that my hand touches the doorknob. With the feeling that, this time, I let him in. So if you're driving down Route 2A and you see someone waving on the side of the road, don't stop. Don't wave back. And most of all, don't look at them. Because some things only exist as long as we believe we haven't seen them. And if one day you see the real faceless trucker, maybe he's waiting for someone to finally stop. I've always heard of bizarre stories about the Texas countryside, but none have gotten to me quite like the damned Goatman's Bridge in Denton. I didn't even know it existed until I took a detour route suggested by my GPS after an accident that blocked the interstate. It was around 2 a.m., and the road was narrow, old, and surrounded by woods on both sides. I just wanted to get to my destination and pull over for the night. When I saw the faded sign that said Old Alton Bridge, I felt a shiver, for no reason. It was one of those old iron bridges, with rusty frames and worn wood. Everything about it seemed wrong. I crossed slowly, more out of instinct than caution. Halfway across the bridge, the truck gave a slight hitch. The engine didn't turn off, but it failed for a second, as if something had sucked the power out of it. That was when I felt it. As if someone was watching me. The air became heavy, still, without the sound of crickets or wind. I looked in the rearview mirror and froze. Two red eyes were staring at me, glowing in the dark, on the side of the bridge I had already crossed. They were too tall to be any ordinary animal. And they were still. Completely still. As if they knew exactly where I was. I accelerated without thinking, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. But the feeling of being followed didn't go away. On the contrary, it grew stronger by the second. The road after the bridge became even narrower, and the headlights barely made it through the darkness. The radio began to hiss, even though it was turned off, and behind the static I heard a sound that made me tremble, hooves hitting the asphalt. Not like a horse. It was heavier. Irregular. As if something bipedal was chasing the truck. I looked in the rearview mirror again and, for an instant, I saw a huge shadow emerging from the woods, with curved horns and shoulders too broad to be human. I thought I was hallucinating, but the sound of hooves continued. Closer. Stronger. When I finally reached an open area, I stopped completely, got out and ran to the back of the truck with the flashlight. There was nothing. No footprint. No brand. But the smell of sulfur in the air was suffocating. I stood there for minutes, waiting for some explanation. But all I heard was my own racing heart and the memory of those red eyes fixed on mine. I walked back to the truck, trying to control the shaking in my hands. As soon as I got in, I noticed something that completely stopped me. The windows were fogged up on the inside. All of them. As if someone had been breathing inside, circulating throughout the cabin while I was out. I ran my hand over the glass and saw a trail running down the passenger side. A trail, as if something with a hoof had hit it. I immediately locked everything and started the engine, but the feeling of presence didn't go away. It was as if I was no longer alone in the cabin. As if something had come in with me, and wanted to stay. I drove on for a few more miles until I reached a brighter area, near a residential neighborhood. Only then could I breathe better. But even stopped, with the engine off, I could still hear a faint buzzing sound coming from the radio. I turned it on just to make sure it was all in my head, and the sound got louder. It sounded like a low, distorted roar, as if a voice was trying to speak through a body that wasn't made to speak. I turned it off immediately and pulled over in front of a closed gas station, just waiting for daylight. The feeling of being watched didn't go away even when the sun rose. The next day, more calmly, I told an older gas station attendant what had happened. He didn't react with surprise. He just asked, "You crossed Goatman's Bridge, right?" When I confirmed, he looked at me for a few seconds and said, "You were lucky. They let you go." According to him, the legend is not just about a creature. It's about a type of entity that guards that place. A spirit of fury, of injustice, that takes shape when someone crosses the bridge without knowing what they're stepping on. Some people only see the eyes. Others hear the footsteps. But those who hear the breathing inside the booth, those are marked. Since then, I have avoided any route that passes near that area. Even with my GPS insisting, I detour. And it's not just me. I've met other truck drivers who have rolled their eyes. One of them said he saw the entire creature standing in the middle of the bridge, with its arms outstretched, as if it were blocking the way. He had to turn around. Another felt claws scratching the bodywork. They all talk about the same smell. The same oppressive silence. And how, after that, something changes. Ever since that early morning, something has stayed with me. It's not a common trauma. It's a constant feeling that someone is watching me in my blind spots. Sometimes, while driving at night, I see red reflections on road signs, even when there's nothing behind me. I've woken up in the cabin with marks on the glass, as if someone, or something, had pressed a hoof against the windshield. And the smell, it comes back every now and then. A heavy sourness that fills the air for a few seconds and then disappears. As if it were just a reminder, I'm still here. One time in the Texas Panhandle, another trucker approached me after hearing a whisper coming from my radio while I was maneuvering in the yard. He said he heard someone growling. When I told him what had happened, he made the sign of the cross and gave me a small wooden crucifix. He said his father, also a trucker, never crossed an old bridge without a protective device. Ever since then, I have kept the crucifix attached to my sun visor. I don't know if it helps, but I have yet to see the eyes again. I try not to think about it too much, but there are nights when I dream about that road. It's always the same scenario, me driving toward the bridge, the headlights illuminating a motionless figure in the center, half man, half goat. Its red eyes watching me as the rest of the world disappears. I wake up sweating, with the sound of hooves pounding in my head. No matter how much time passes, it seems like the thing still follows me, even if only in my memory. Or worse, in the shadows. So if you're ever in Texas and your GPS tells you to cross an old bridge in Denton, stop. Turn around. Even if it looks harmless. Even if everything is quiet. Because if you cross, he might see you. And if he sees you, he might decide to follow you. And then, my friend, it's only a matter of time before those red eyes appear in your rearview mirror, too. Route 11W in Tennessee is known among truckers for being treacherous. Lots of accidents, sharp curves, drivers who disappear out of nowhere. But no one talks about it very loudly. Only in hushed tones, between coffee stops. I've been driving along it for years, always respectfully. But it was on one of those trips, in early March, that I experienced something that made me question everything. It was around 3 a.m., the road was empty, with light fog covering the shoulder. All I could hear was the static of the CB radio, when I decided to tune in to the frequency used by local truckers. And that's when it all started. Amidst the noise, a voice emerged. "Can anyone hear me? I need help, I'm trapped in the truck." The voice gave me goosebumps right away. Because I knew it. It was Carl's. A friend of mine, a road buddy, who had died 5 years earlier on that same stretch of road. He had flipped over on a curve during a storm and they couldn't get his body out for hours. He was trapped in the cab, calling out on the radio, but no one could find him in time. I was on the road that night. I remember the commotion, the pain. And now, that same voice, the same accent, the same way of speaking, it was there, alive in my radio. I thought it was some old recording, some interference. But the transmission continued, "The truck is overturned, I can't get out, can anyone hear me?" The voice was weak, desperate, but clear. It wasn't noise, it wasn't a repeat. It was as if he were speaking live. I froze. I grabbed the microphone and answered, without even thinking, "Carl?" Silence. For a few seconds, just static. And then the voice came back, quieter, "John, is that you?" I almost dropped the radio. He called my name. And I hadn't said my name. Not on that frequency. At that moment, the truck's engine failed for 2 seconds. The interior lights flickered. I looked around, but the road was deserted. I felt a strange chill, a pressure in my chest. As if something was approaching. The voice came back once more, "Find me, around the bend after the bridge. I'm waiting." It was exactly where he had died. And I knew I was only a few miles away. I could have ignored it, I could have turned off the radio and kept going, but something pulled me along. A mix of fear and need. As if I owed it to him. As if it was more than just a coincidence. The road became even quieter, as if the world had stopped just to make me hear. I pointed my headlights ahead and drove slowly, waiting for the curve after the bridge. When it appeared, I slowed down. The asphalt there still bore marks from the accident. The guardrail was crumpled, the wilted flowers held together with tape. I slowly pulled over to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and just listened. The radio crackled again. Only now the voice seemed weaker. "It's cold here. I'm still stuck." And for a second, I swear I felt the cabin get cold. As if the air had been sucked out. My breath came out in steam, even with the heater on. I grabbed the flashlight and went down, not knowing what I expected to find. I walked to the edge of the curve, where the ravine begins to descend, and reflexively pointed the light down. Down below, between the trees, I saw something metallic glint. As if it were an old bodywork. As if the truck was still there. But it was impossible. His vehicle had been removed years ago. Still, the marks were there. The rail from the fall, the broken tree trunk, the crushed grass. And as I took a step forward, the radio inside my cabin turned on by itself, loud. "Don't leave me here." The voice was no longer calm. It was a muffled scream. And then, the sound stopped. The radio turned off by itself. And the road went completely silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. I stood there, frozen, staring into space, feeling that if I took one more step, something would pull me with it. I got back in the truck and sat with my hands on the steering wheel for almost half an hour. The radio didn't turn on anymore. The air got warmer. The road went back to normal. But on that part of the curve, to this day, when I pass by, I turn off the radio and don't look to either side. And I always leave my high beams on, not to see the road, but so that if it's still there, I know someone remembers. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize. I thought of old recordings, some kind of interference, even hallucination caused by fatigue. But then it happened again. A week later, on another stretch of the same route, I passed a truck driver and we exchanged messages on the radio. As I changed the frequency to say goodbye, I heard it again, "John, turn after the bridge." I turned the radio off immediately. There was no way that was happening again. And the worst part is that, after that, other colleagues started reporting similar voices. Always a cry for help. Always on the same frequency. I told a veteran of the road at a rest stop in Rogersville what had happened. He wasn't surprised. He just said, "You've spoken to someone who shouldn't have been left behind." He said that drivers have been reporting these phantom transmissions on Route 11W since the 1980s. And that, according to him, only those who have some connection to the person who died there can hear them. It doesn't happen to just anyone. It's as if the deceased chooses who they want to talk to. That left me cold. Because at the time of the accident, I was the closest to Carl. And I was the last one to talk to him on the radio before he disappeared from the system. Now, whenever I cross that route, I leave the radio off until I've passed the curve. And sometimes, even then, I feel the urge to respond when I hear a longer hiss. As if something inside me knows it's still waiting. That it's stuck somewhere between a distress call and death. A voice on a loop, frozen in time. And the scary thing is that now, every now and then, I get calls on the radio in completely different parts, but with the same frequency. Always starting with, "Anyone listening?" Maybe it's crazy. Maybe it's not. But if one day, on Route 11W, your radio crackles and you hear a voice calling for help, think twice before you answer. It might just be interference. It might just be the wind blowing sound through the woods. But if the voice says your name, it's already too late. You've been chosen. I've never been one to believe in urban legends, but after what happened to me on Riverview Drive in New Jersey, I started to rethink everything. I was carrying a light load towards Newark and took the route there to avoid traffic on the main highway. It was almost midnight. The road was deserted, with that fine mist that comes from the river, and the streetlights were few and dim. The weather was perfect for a scare, but until then, everything seemed normal. That is, until I saw the woman. She appeared out of nowhere. She was in the middle of the road, wearing a white dress, her hair down, standing still. She wasn't running, she wasn't asking for help. She was just there, as if she were waiting. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, the load shook. But when I looked again, she was gone. There was no one in front of the truck. I got out, scared, with the flashlight in my hands, thinking that maybe I had run over someone, but there was no body, no sign of anything. No marks on the ground. Just the sound of the wind blowing through the trees and that shiver running down my spine. I went back to the truck still trying to understand what had happened. That's when I noticed something strange. The passenger door was ajar. And I was sure it was closed. I went over there, opened it carefully, and looked inside. Nothing. But on the bench, a wet trail. As if someone had sat there with wet clothes. And the smell of flowers. Not the good kind. A smell that was too sweet, sickening, almost rotten. The kind of smell that doesn't come from a living flower. I locked everything and started the engine, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. While driving, the radio started to crackle. I hadn't even turned it on, but it turned on by itself. First just static, then some old music, really low, like from the 50s. And over the music, a female voice whispering, you couldn't make out the words. Just the tone. A lament. A sadness that seemed to come straight from the back of his throat. And at that moment, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw. For less than 2 seconds, someone sat in the back seat. A woman, with a wet white dress clinging to her body and her eyes fixed on mine. I twisted my neck around, my heart pounding, but the back seat was empty. Completely empty. Even so, the feeling of being watched remained. I kept driving, tense now, sweating cold, even with the window open and the cold wind blowing in. The music on the radio stopped. The static returned. And then, right at the end of the road, I saw it again. The same woman. Standing on the shoulder, staring at the truck. She wasn't moving. She was just watching. As I passed her, the headlights illuminated her face for a second. Pale. Expressionless. And her eyes, black. Completely black. The truck started acting up right after that. The dashboard light was flashing, the engine was sputtering, the radio was turning on and off by itself. I pulled over as fast as I could, turned everything off, and sat there in the dark, trying to catch my breath. That's when I smelled it again. Rotten flowers. So strong that I choked. I looked around the cabin and for a second I thought I saw a shadow in the passenger window. But it wasn't my reflection. It was something, outside. It looked like someone was leaning against the window, looking in. But when I turned on the headlights, there was nothing. I managed to start the engine and leave, my heart racing. I only stopped when I arrived at a gas station that was open 20 minutes later. Still out of breath, I told the attendant what had happened. He wasn't surprised. He just nodded and said, "You passed by Annie's Road, right?" When I confirmed, he replied, "There are truck drivers who never drive there again. It's always a woman in white. Always on the same stretch. And almost always, someone sees her again before dawn." According to him, they say Annie was run over there in the 60s, on her way to the prom. Her body was never found whole. Since then, she's been hitchhiking, or just, watching. The part that stuck with me the most was when he said, "If she got in your truck, watch out. She likes to come back." Since that day, on every night trip I take, I leave a flower on the passenger seat. And whenever I hear static on the radio, I turn it off right away. Because what I saw on that road wasn't my imagination. It wasn't sleep. It was someone, or something, still trying to find its way back. And sometimes when I look in the rearview mirror, I think she's still sitting there. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on with my life as normal, but it was impossible to forget that night. Some mornings, the radio would still turn on by itself. I never listened to the old music again, but every now and then I hear a whisper. Always on the passenger side. I've already changed the radio, checked the truck's electrical system, nothing works. I've thought about selling the vehicle, but it's like she's become attached to it. Or me. To this day, there are days when the smell of rotten flowers invades the cabin without warning. Out of nowhere. Sometimes while I'm driving in absolute silence. One day, weeks after the incident, I stopped at a roadside diner and started talking to a group of older truck drivers. I told them briefly what had happened. One of them, who had been very quiet until then, slowly looked up and said, "If she looked you in the eye, that's it." He said he had a friend who saw the same woman in the 90s. The guy crashed his truck trying to avoid her. He survived, but he was never the same again. He said he heard her voice in his dreams. Always asking to come home. I've since learned that Annie isn't just an apparition. She's a presence. A memory. A mistake on the road that's never been righted. And the worst part is, no one knows what she wants. Some say it's revenge. Others say it's just loneliness. But everyone agrees on one thing: once you see Annie on Riverview Drive, she never really goes away. She might disappear for a while. But she comes back. She always comes back. When you least expect it. So if you ever drive down that stretch of New Jersey and see a woman standing in the middle of the road, don't brake. Don't look. And for the love of God, don't leave the passenger door unlocked. Because if she gets in, she's no longer a legend. You're the one who becomes part of it. Route 491, once known as Route 666, has a heavy reputation among older truckers. Many people avoid talking about it, while others don't even want to drive near it. But that night, in a hurry to get to Gallup, I decided to take a shortcut. The road was quiet, the weather was dry, and the sky was clear, with no sign of a storm. It was around 1:45 in the morning when I saw the figure. A man standing on the shoulder of the road, wearing dark pants, a dirty white shirt, and an old cap. He was motionless, staring into space, with one hand raised, asking for a ride. He looked lost. He looked real. I slowed down and pulled over, more out of instinct than decision. The passenger door opened by itself before I could say anything. The man climbed in, sat down, and closed the door. He didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead, as if he knew exactly where he wanted to go. I thought it was strange, but my tiredness prevented me from questioning him. I just said, "Good night," and he didn't respond. I kept driving. His presence was heavy. The air inside the cabin became denser, quieter, as if the sound of the engine had become muffled. After a few kilometers, I decided to ask, "Where are you going, partner?" No answer. Not a movement. Just eyes fixed on the road. And then, when I looked back at the passenger seat, he was no longer there. Gone. No sound, no door opening, no signal. Just the seat sunk in, as if someone was still sitting there. I braked suddenly and pulled over, got out of the cabin to look, thinking he might have fallen out, even though it was impossible without opening the door. Nothing. No one. Just the desert around me, and the most suffocating silence I've ever felt. I got back into the truck, and the seat still looked occupied. The seatbelt was taut, and the smell in the air was different. Something old, musty, like clothes that had been stored away too long. I started the engine and drove away, faster than I should have. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I swear to God, for a second, he was there again. Sitting in the back of the cab. Looking at me. Only this time, he was smiling. I drove for over an hour without stopping, without blinking. The passenger seat still had that heavy mark, as if someone invisible was still there. I tried to ignore it, but every time I passed a darker section, the radio would hiss on its own. And every now and then, a voice would emerge from the static. Weak. Low. Like I was trying to form words but didn't know how. It wasn't a language I knew. It was like a whisper coming from within the metal. At every turn, I felt more watched. And every time I looked in the rearview mirror, the back seat seemed to be occupied by a shadow. When I finally pulled into a stop near Shiprock, I jumped out of the truck on shaky legs. I walked into the convenience store and went straight to the bathroom. It took me a few minutes just to get my breathing under control. When I came back, the attendant was looking at my truck. He asked if I was with anyone. I told him no. He frowned and said, "I saw a man get out of your truck, but he's not here right now." That made my blood run cold. I asked him what he looked like. And he described exactly the man who had come into my cab hours earlier. I told him what had happened, and the gas station attendant didn't seem surprised. He said that this story is old news on that road. That some drivers swear they've picked up a hitchhiker, and when they look again, he's gone. That he only appears to those who drive alone, at dawn, and always near the old stretch of 666. He said that, according to legend, the man died trying to get home, and now he tries to finish his journey by hitching rides with passers-by. But be careful, he said. Not everyone comes back alone after he gets on. The phrase kept ringing in my head for the rest of the night. I got back into the truck with a strange feeling. I turned the cabin upside down, checked the windows, the mirrors, even the floor. Nothing. But the mark on the passenger seat was still there. And worse, a small stain, like dried blood, on the seat seam. It hadn't been there before. It shouldn't have been. I quickly wiped it off and started the engine, wanting to get out of that place. But before I left, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. And there he was, again, stopped on the side of the road. Waving. As if he were starting all over again. After that early morning, I never drove Route 491 alone at night again. Even with the shortest and most peaceful route, I always deviate. Because the fear is not just about seeing the passenger again. You don't realize when he came in. It's waking up with it already sitting there, without you knowing when it started. There are nights when I wake up in the cabin and the passenger seatbelt is stretched. Sometimes with handprints on the door, as if someone had placed their weight there. I've already changed the upholstery twice. I have already washed the bench with all the products I know. But the brand always comes back. I talk to other drivers about this. Most of them avoid talking about it. But there was one who, with just a glance, confirmed everything. He said he saw the man in the rearview mirror and, when he stopped to think, he was no longer in the seat, but the smell, the weight in the air, everything indicated that he was still nearby. One of them said he tried to ask the man's name. He said the passenger turned slowly and looked at him, without eyes. Just a smile. And then, he disappeared into thin air. Just like that, without a sound, without a sign. As if he had never been there, but had left something behind. A trail. A presence. Today, I carry a crucifix on my dashboard, a rosary attached to my rearview mirror, and a Bible on the passenger seat. I'm not religious, but I became one after that night. Because of all the stories I've heard on the road, this is the only one that never goes away. The passenger always comes back. Always find a new lone driver. It always appears on the same road, in the same stretch. And he always comes in without saying a word. As if I was completing an unfinished cycle. So if you're driving alone on Route 491 and you see a man standing on the side of the road in a white shirt and an old cap, keep going. Don't stop. Even if he looks lost, even if he looks like he needs help. Because if he gets in your truck, it won't just be him who disappears along the way. A part of you might never make it to your destination after that.